Okay, yeah. My name is Matt Sparazza.
I'm Father Sam Kachuba. And cheers, Matt.
Cheers. Round 2. You drink your whiskey. I will drink my chamomile tea.
I feel like it's a good thing to have for the conversation we're about to have. You know? Like,
yeah, we both had the same idea. We just took 2 different routes.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the stiff drink for many of these things coming out of Rome these days is usually a helpful, just a helpful coping mechanism.
Oh, sure.
So
I just knew I needed something to calm me down.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it, because we're not quite doing a hot take. We've had a couple of days now to think about this. And
we let it seep in,
which I think is good. So we're talking about the Declaration Fiducia Supplicans from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, issued by Victor Manuel Cardinal Fernandez, the prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, and some of the headlines that it has generated globally and nationally and in secular press and in Catholic press, and then some of the concerns that it has raised. I have had, I don't know about you, I've had a lot of conversations with people, laity and priests alike, who have raised some serious concerns about this document and what it means. And then I think there's a lot of concern too about like the misinterpretation of it by, especially in the secular media, and some of the ways that I think our global press is not fully able to nuance theologically or embrace fully what some of this stuff means. And so the perspective that they're giving is somewhat false.
Yeah. I'm sure you've had more conversations about it than I have. But the reason that I wanted to talk about it is because I have had faithful Catholics come up to me and say, "Hey, did you hear the Pope said we could bless gay marriages?" And like, these are not, I emphasize the word faithful. You know what I mean? This is not someone who was rooting for that.
Right.
You know? And you're right. It's because of the secular media, you know? But regardless, it is a confusing topic, like across the board.
Yeah,
even for those who are paying attention. Is my point.
What we're dealing with is a world in which there's sort of an expectation that we've all got to kind of get on board with this stuff, and the church, which does not recognize such a reality as same-sex marriage, the church which holds to a definition of marriage, which is that it is between a man and a woman, and it is the exclusive union of a man and a woman. Many times open to life, all these things, right? Many times the church will look like it's behind the times on these issues. And so something like this that comes out can seem like it's the church getting in step with the prevailing culture, but that's actually not at all what's happening in this declaration. And I think that's an important thing to point out. Like, right from the very beginning, this declaration explains nothing is changing about the teaching of the Catholic Church in regards to the dignity and the sanctity of marriage.
And can just dig in for a second, right?
Yeah.
For those of our listeners who might not know why is it important that the definition of marriage, right, the definition of what the church teaches doesn't change?
Well, because the definition of marriage, first of all, is something that isn't the church's to define. It is God's, and it's part of divine revelation. And the church cannot change divine revelation. It's part of the divine plan for creation. Marriage is a natural institution. Male and female are created for one another, and we see that as a biological reality. We see that in the order of nature, and we see that not simply as a social construct, though it has a social element to it, right? Like, marriage is good for society. Wherever you have good marriages, wherever you have healthy marriages, wherever the family is intact, the society flourishes. This is demonstrable and sociological data, right? I'm not making outrageous claims here. So what Fiducia Supplicans talks about is it's a reflection on the nature of blessings, what blessings are, and how blessings ought to be given. Now, what's being trumpeted around, especially in secular media, is that somehow Pope Francis has said that priests can bless gay couples or same-sex marriages. But that's not at all what it says. In fact, it repeats several times. No, that's not true.
You beat me to my question. I was going to say, does it say that?
Yeah. Well, the other part of it is the idea that Pope Francis says it. No, this is a document of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith.
Right.
Francis signed it, meaning he approved it, but it's not a document written in the name, like by Francis.
So is it a part of his magisterium?
Well, this is the other thing that is a whole other issue, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but the idea of the magisterium of one pope versus another pope, that's a very strange understanding of what magisterium means. When we talk about magisterium is the deposit of the faith in those who are charged with teaching it, authentically handing on the fullness
the ages.
The magisterium has the responsibility of authentically handing on the full deposit of the faith, of divine revelation and the sacred tradition of the church. Now, there are things that the magisterium cannot change. There are ways that the magisterium can authentically apply divine revelation or the teachings of the church to particular pastoral circumstances. But there's this new sort of phraseology that's come up, which is to talk about the magisterium of Francis as though it's something separate from the magisterium or from papal magisterium as a whole.
Right? I see.
And this is actually ecclesiology. So far from worrying about the blessings here, what I'm actually way more concerned about is the ecclesiology that this document is presenting. And I have some serious
two-parter.
I have some serious theological questions here. But let's just talk about the idea of blessings first. Because I think that's an important one, right?
Yeah.
So first, it's talking about blessings and how blessings can be given, and it's talking about the nature. And lots of people have written about this. So we're going to link to some articles in the show notes. You can go and read those. There's some really good people who have analyzed this well and who have, I think, a very, very good take on a lot of this stuff in terms of what blessings mean and everything else. But first of all, like it says, relatively not controversial things. Like people want God's blessing.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Wow.
Some of it is that when I read it, right, and I'm taking notes. At one point, I wrote down, I agree with the beauty of a blessing, but can't understand how they don't recognize how this is pastorally inappropriate.
Yeah.
And that might sound like, I mean, I suppose it could be a strong or hot take. I don't mean it in that way. But rather, the first part here, on the pastoral meaning of blessings, right? And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, it seems unlikely that this doesn't get misconstrued. And as a matter of fact, we have seen that it already has been.
I agree.
Right? Well, one day in, the front cover of New York Times, right? I mean, I think it was the front cover, right? Is Father James Martin giving a blessing to two men who are supposedly married, right?
Right.
But the thing is, it's clearly not in the spirit of repentance and aid to live a chaste and pure life. In the picture, they're holding hands.
Yeah, and it's also not in the sense of like private, not public. This is very much something that is being placed as a this is how it's going to be.
And so the point of what I'm trying to say is, I actually really I appreciated the elaboration on the beauty of a blessing and the fact that it brings about actual grace. I actually really liked that explanation. I just didn't see how it fits. It felt like they're trying to squeeze something in here.
Yeah, there's the whole thing with that particular story that you're referring to at the New York Times. I mean, it just suggests that the caption talks about Vatican sanctioned, as though this is officially approved. And the document is at pains. So read the document too. We're going to link to the document in the show notes. Like read the actual document. Don't just read the secular reports, and don't just read the Catholic news organizations that are reporting on it. Read the document. Go to the text itself. And this is a thing that actually I think if we did a better job of this, if we had learned to do this a long time ago, read the actual documents, we wouldn't have some of the questions that we have. Like for the longest time, you'd hear people talking about the Spirit of Vatican II. So in the Spirit of Vatican II, we have to do all these things. Read the documents of Vatican II, and you're not going to find anything about the Spirit of Vatican II in there. The things that are most often justified as the Spirit of Vatican II, they're not there. So read this document. And you're going to see that it says very not controversial things about the fact that people come seeking blessings because they're in need of God's grace. Okay, that's fine. Where there could be some controversy, and it's not controversy so much as like maybe some good, healthy theological debate, is making the distinction between liturgical blessings and non-liturgical blessings. So there's the blessing that I give as a priest in the context of the celebration of the Mass. At the end of the Mass, I give everybody a blessing. Guess what? When I give that blessing, there are all kinds of people in the church. And some of those people are even sinners. I mean, all of those people, sorry, all of those people are sinners. And the blessing itself is being given by a sinner. So it's in the context of a liturgy, there's a blessing that's given. It's not to bless the sin that all of us commit.
Right.
It's actually to ask that God would bless us with his grace so that we could not sin, so that we could sin less, right? So if we understand that, like the nature of a blessing as something that is given to us by God, all right, that's good. In the context of the liturgy is a privileged place wherein the faithful encounter the living God. In the liturgical expression of the church, the liturgical life of the church, we encounter God himself. And if we're able to encounter God through the liturgy, then his blessings come to us also through the liturgy. But then there's the non-liturgical blessing that this document talks about, which is, it's an interesting phrase. Larry Chapp, who someday I want Larry Chapp to be a friend of the show.
He will be.
Yeah, I can't wait. Like I really, really want him to be a friend of this show. But Larry Chapp has a
that's a whole new category.
Yeah, he's got a great thing on Catholic World Report. We'll put a link to this also, where he talks about the fact that blessings, it's hard to say that they're not liturgical, even when given outside of the context of liturgy. Why? Because why is it that somebody comes to a priest and asks for a blessing?
Right. Well, because you've got the capacity to say the Mass, right? Right. You've got
it's saying that there's something about who I am as a priest that is connected
to the indelible seal.
Yeah, and it's connected to the church's power to give blessing. Right? Like it's not my personal blessing. Like you can bless your son, and it's your personal blessing as his natural father to give him a blessing. It is distinct from the kind of blessing that I can give him as a priest.
Right.
I can give him a blessing, but every blessing that I give is actually the church's blessing. Right? It's like the only reason I can bless is because I have the faculty to celebrate Mass and to bless from the church. Right? So we have to see blessings actually then in the whole context of ecclesiology. And this is an important thing. So maybe that distinction between liturgical blessing and non-liturgical blessing isn't the most precise language.
Okay.
And that's important, okay? But then as it goes on, so we could like quibble with that, but that's more of a let's figure out that language.
We're splitting hairs.
Sort of. I mean, that's not the thing that I think is the biggest issue, but it is something that I think Larry Chapp is correct when he points it out and says this is problematic. To me, that though relates to the overall picture of ecclesiology, the theology of the church that's being presented here. And that's where I actually have more problems. Not so much with what blessings are or who can receive a blessing, because the fact of the matter is that sinful people receive blessings all the time. Sinners go seeking out blessings all the time.
And I agree with that, obviously, right? As someone who often, I guess I don't know if I often seek out blessings, but I certainly try and participate in the sacraments. I know that this is a sacramental versus a sacrament, but I understand that. That I don't want to say that I had a problem with the document, because that's, first of all, I don't know if that's necessarily even appropriate to say. But I do think that something that was confusing, right, or at least something that I found a little difficult to understand, it proposes that people come to blessings, this is what I think. I think it's a little incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
it proposes that people come to blessings in search for God. And it says that's the only reason why people go to blessings, to receive blessings rather. And I quite frankly, I just don't think that's the case. I think that's why people should go to receive blessings. But if I were to make an analogy, right, it would be when I was younger and I did something wrong, I would seek out my parents with a guilty conscience, right? And then hope they would tell me that what I did was okay. And I think, unfortunately, that is going to happen with this particular case, right? It's going to be an attempt to seek out permission as given through a blessing, which is not actually permission, right? And so that is why I say it's a cause for confusion. And it's not even because the document in and of itself is confusing. The document is super clear. We're not changing anything about marriage. Nothing.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, Matt, because the idea of coming with a guilty conscience and wanting to be told that everything's okay, that's an interesting read. That wasn't my read on, but that's a really interesting take. Like that people are looking for approval. My experience with blessings is usually that people have some reason that they want God's help. There's something going on in their life where they want God's help. Well, no, but this is clear. But I think you're onto something that's really interesting. So generally, why do people stop me after Mass for a special blessing? Distinct from the blessing that I just gave after Mass. It's their birthday, and they would like a special birthday blessing.
Wait, is that the
completely
most
real?
Reason?
Yeah, probably the most common is it's my birthday. Could I have a birthday blessing? Or I have to travel. Could you please give me a blessing because I'm on the road? Some people will ask for a blessing because they have like surgery or a test or a doctor's appointment or something. And a lot of times with those folks, I'll ask them if they want the anointing of the sick. Like, you're going in for surgery. Would you like to be anointed? And some people will say,
a sacrament opposed to the sacrament.
Exactly. And some people will say, no, I don't want the sacrament. I just want a blessing. I'm like, oh, okay.
I don't have time for that.
Yeah. Well, like I'll pray with you for good health and for the guidance of your doctors, and I'll give you a blessing that God would restore you to full health. And no, I don't have any issue with that.
Why not?
One of the really moving ones that I've had is a couple that I know that is civilly married and awaiting a declaration of nullity for one of their marriages. The other one already has a declaration of nullity. And they've had this experience of wanting to return to the life of the church. And so they don't receive communion. They don't go to the sacraments. They come to Mass with great fidelity. But the request that they'll make to me sometimes after Mass is, Father, can we have a blessing for strength to persevere and to keep going? And I don't have a problem praying with them and asking God to bless them because they're striving to do the right thing and they want to persevere so that they can regularize their situation, so that they can embrace the sacrament of matrimony. They've experienced some kind of conversion that's drawing them back to the Lord.
Right.
And so while objectively their situation is sinful and they know that and understand it, that doesn't mean that they don't desire God's grace.
Right.
And so this is a couple that to pray with them and to offer them a blessing it's a privilege, right? I'm happy to help them.
Beg the Lord for mercy here.
Right. But they're also not asking me to approve of what their situation is and tell them that there's nothing wrong with it. They actually know full well. And so this is where I think your suggestion of people like with a guilty conscience looking for approval, that was really interesting to me. And I think partly because my experience, if I'm going to be approached by anybody for something that's maybe a little out of the ordinary, this would be it. This is like the example that I can think of. But here's the deal though.
The difference between those two situations is that one has the potential, right, to be remedied.
Right. Exactly.
Whereas the other, and that's why it's confusing. And to be clear, I hope it's not coming off as if I'm somehow rooting against, right, the desire to pray for mercy for these people. I want to say don't be so naive, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to anyone in particular, right? But like I read it and I kind of just was like, I mean, come on, you know, like if you were really asking for that strength, you know, you wouldn't hold hands and you know what I mean? And like treat it like essentially a civil union. You know what I mean? Like that isn't how one would approach that.
Right.
Not really. Certainly it would seem to me that that would be a red flag to the priest, you know, that if two people came to you in an irregular marriage, you know, that could not potentially, like, there's no chance it could be remedied to the church's teaching. Zero. You know?
Yeah.
And come showing signs of affection towards one another as if the blessing is a moment of joy for the continuation, right? Seemingly, you know?
Right. Well, and the other big difference is that in the example that I'm talking about, they are not asking for the blessing as a couple per se. They're asking for the blessing as human beings in need of God's help.
Right.
And that is to me an important distinction. Now, I think I'm opening myself up for some criticism from people who know very well what this is about and who understand this in a way. And so I think there's fair room to criticize even that point.
Right.
How much are we talking about blessing a relationship versus blessing individuals? I think there's been a lot of people trying in this to say the document doesn't say anything so much about blessing the relationship so much as blessing humans, blessing persons. I'm comfortable with the idea of blessing persons, even persons who are struggling or who are living a life that is contrary to the values of the gospel, contrary to the teaching of the church.
That's another thing that we've said, like, you know, since it came out, we have spoken prior to this particular recording, right?
Yeah.
And at one point, you said something that I thought was really a great point, which is like, no one was ever saying, don't bless gay people. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't a rule of the church.
and if it was, nobody ever told me that, like, somehow there was a class of persons that was unworthy of receiving a blessing.
Right. At no point.
But there are certain things that I can't bless, right? Like, I can't give a blessing to a guy who has told me, I intend to use this house for human trafficking. Would you please bless my human trafficking establishment? No, I can't. I'm not doing that. I can't do that. Would you come and bless my
establishment?
Yeah. Would you come bless my porn shop? No, I'm not. I'm not doing that. I just can't. I just can't do it. But like I had a guy open,
and we're proud of you for it.
Yeah, thanks. Wow, really appreciate that. I had a guy.
I should have said not with that attitude.
I had a guy who's opening a store, and he said, "Would you please come and bless my store?" And it was a perfectly normal kind of a store, nothing weird, right? And I said, "Sure, I'll come bless your store," because he wanted God's blessing on his business undertaking. Like there are things that it's perfectly okay to bless, and in fact, the church provides for us blessings that we can use. Or there's that possibility of spontaneous blessing. There's a girl who frequently after Mass will ask me for a blessing, or her mother is the one who's really kind of pushing her for the blessing because she's got a swim meet and she wants to compete well. And I'm very happy to give her a blessing to compete well.
Right.
I don't have any issue with that kind of stuff. Nor do I expect that the people who are asking for the blessing are perfect or always living in full accord with what the church teaches, or that they're fully measuring up, because I know that as the one giving the blessing, I don't always measure up. I don't always meet the criteria for being perfect.
Right.
In fact, I'm pretty sure I've never met the criteria for being perfect. And I'm
I was thinking when you said that. Yeah. Otherwise, I would have reacted.
I appreciate that. But like, so I understand all of this, right? That there are certain things like okay.
So it's, simply put, it's proximity to sin that plays the primary role in whether or not you are capable of blessing a certain thing, right? A thing being a store, but a thing being a relationship, right? As opposed to the people. We're not talking about the people, right? We're talking about the situation. We're talking about the location. We're talking about the object.
Yeah. Well, and then in that same line of thinking, right? That proximity to sin, or just the tendency towards something, right? A relationship like if a couple comes to me as a couple asking for a blessing on their relationship, well, what is this relationship tending toward? Is this something that can tend towards virtue, can tend towards fully living out the truth of what the gospel says? So, for example, if an engaged couple comes to me and asks for a blessing, there's a ritual for blessing an engaged couple. Because even if that couple is struggling with chastity before marriage, whatever it might be, their relationship is tending in that direction of asking for the Lord's grace
the marriage
in the
covenant.
Sacrament. Exactly. So it's tending in that direction. So it's on a natural level and also even on a supernatural level moving in that direction. Whereas a couple that's living in an objectively sinful situation, whether heterosexual or homosexual, if they're living in a situation that is not in accord with what the church teaches, what the moral law of the church teaches, which, by the way, the declaration Fiducia Supplicans issued by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith does not change anything about the church's moral teaching, and it is very clear to say that it doesn't change the church's moral teaching on this. So that's an important thing, right? Just to remember that. But if that's if all that's true, then
we should keep repeating it. They did.
Yeah, there are certain things, relationships that can't be blessed, but the persons who are involved in that can still seek out God's grace and God's help. But here's the other thing: if somebody's going to come and seek God's grace and help, there also needs to be some sense of, I want to change. I want my life to be more conformed to the gospel. And this is something that I don't think has gotten enough attention in Fiducia Supplicans. I can't find where it is exactly right now. But it is here that those blessings, any blessing that we give, should be because, let's see, one who asks for a blessing shows himself to be in need of God's saving presence in his life. And one who asks for a blessing from the church recognizes that the church is a sacrament of salvation, of the salvation that God offers. But then the idea that the blessing is something that is meant to help the person to more fully conform their lives to the gospel.
Right.
I'm on board with that idea.
Of course.
Like, if I'm asking for God's blessing, then I'm asking God to conform me more perfectly to himself. But there are going to be some times when maybe I'm asking for a blessing in a performative way. Like, I want the blessing because it looks good if the priest showed up to bless this. It makes it look legit.
Right.
So if I have a priest come to my event and say a prayer, that makes it look like this is approved. Everything's okay.
This is a Catholic event.
Yeah, everything's on the up and up.
Right.
Or it might even like assuage my conscience. Hey, I know I'm doing the wrong thing, but look, at least I asked for a blessing for this.
Right.
So like it's probably okay. Like that should pretty much cover me. Right? Like, Father, can you give me a quick blessing and then I'm all set. I don't have to worry about this. Like, you get that as jokes
that's
from
that
people.
Permission seeking that I.
Yeah, exactly. But like overall, I don't really have an issue with the blessing stuff that's included here.
No.
You know? And I think we should be careful about getting too caught up in or like too much hand wringing over what kinds of blessings this is doing. But to your point about James Martin, S.J., his recent almost instantaneous publicity of blessing a gay couple, a same-sex couple, while describing them as married, which the church doesn't recognize such a thing as same-sex marriage, so it's wrong for us to use that kind of language. And him describing it also as like a real joy to be able to bless them as a couple. Right? I don't want to say to bless their marriage because that would distort actually what he wrote about it. But there's a problem there. What this declaration says is that we should avoid any publicity. We should avoid there being any kind of appearance that this elevates anything to the level of marriage, or that it in any way replaces the sacrament of marriage or something like that. And I'm sorry, a lot of this feels kind of like what I was looking at that picture, just saying this feels like just I dare you to tell me I'm wrong. This feels a lot like I'm pushing an agenda, not like there's a genuine request for blessing. Now, I don't want to presume people's motives, right? And so I'm open to the idea that I'm wrong about that, but
Right.
I don't think I am.
That's why I said that.
If I'm real
before.
honest, I don't think I'm wrong about
hoping
this.
I'm wrong.
Yeah, but I don't think I am. I don't think you are either.
Right.
There's something about this that makes me go, I just don't know. Something doesn't smell right there, and something doesn't seem to actually be obedient to what this declaration is talking about.
And that's I've said it before on the show, and it was something that I really came to realize because of our interview with Chris Altieri, right? Mm-hmm. Being charitable does not demand that you be naive.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, you know? And that's why when I'm reading this, 2 points, right? But I mentioned before that I wrote down, you know, I think that this all of the talk about blessings in this document is beautiful. Like it increased my appreciation for what a blessing actually does.
Yeah.
You know, like I had not thought about it along with the term of actual grace, you know, so it actually changed the way I thought about it. And I thought to myself, that's fantastic. That's great. Right. But at the same time, I look at the situation and I say, I just don't so I would pick a particular line. It says in the presentation, the introduction, right? Actually, it's prior to the introduction. It says it is precisely in this context that one can understand the possibility of blessing couples in irregular situations and same-sex couples without officially validating their status or changing in any way the church's perennial teaching on marriage. And what I wrote down was, but does it do that unofficially?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, does it give the presentation of like, well, you know, we don't approve of this, wink, wink.
Right. And that's where there's a definite challenge and I think a definite problem. And
right.
So we're going to have to see what happens.
Problem.
Yeah. One of the things that our friends over at the Pillar, and I really want them to be our friends too. I want JD Flynn and Ed Condon.
Want to be friends at the Pillar.
Yeah. I want like Larry Chapp, JD Flynn, Ed Condon. I want to be their friend. I really do. I like those guys.
Okay.
I like the stuff that they put out there.
Much like we are friends with Dr. Scott Hahn.
Yeah. Close personal friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
almost family members even.
Here, hey, let's just say friend of the show, Chris Altieri, also had a great piece. We're going to link to his article as well in the show notes here. But there's a lot of stuff that's been one of the things that JD Flynn talks about is the idea that there's going to be some winking at the spirit of Fiducia Supplicans. So even though the text doesn't say that you can do this, there's going to be like a lot of people saying, well, it's basically allowed, even though it's not. They're just going to say it's in the spirit of, and that's a real danger. Here's a little thing for our priest listeners that I think that they might appreciate as a joke, as something funny that I found in this document. If you're looking for something lighthearted in this moment, look to paragraph 35 of Fiducia Supplicans, where it says, therefore, the pastoral sensibility of ordained ministers should also be formed to perform blessings spontaneously that are not found in the Book of Blessings. Now, do you know, Matt, why that's hilarious to read?
No.
Because if you have ever talked to an ordained minister, the Book of Blessings is one of the most widely despised and disused books that has ever been produced by the church, because the Book of Blessings is useless. If there's any sentiment that is shared almost universally by priests, it's that the Book of Blessings is dumb. Because you know what the Book of Blessings forgets to do? Bless things. In the entire Book of Blessings, there's like hardly any places where it says the priest now blesses the thing. There's like not an indication of where the priest is supposed to make the sign of the cross. It is the most useless liturgical book ever created. Nobody likes it. So most of us, we only use it if we absolutely have to, and then we have to figure out where to put a blessing in, or we go and we find some other sort of a blessing ritual somewhere and we try to use that instead, because the Book of Blessings is a useless book the way that it is written right now. So this idea that we should be spontaneously doing blessings that are not found in the Book of Blessings, guess what? That's what we've been doing for decades.
Right. Yeah.
That's what all priests have been doing, because the Book of Blessings is so unusable. So if you ever want to know, like, are these guys in Rome really in touch with the pastoral reality, the lived reality of priests on the ground? No, they're not. They have no idea what's going on in our lives. And I don't think they really care. That's a separate issue. That's a whole other tangent I could go on.
that is different episode, man.
Well, let's change gears for a second. let's change gears for a second to the
Yes,
other
please.
theology here that's coming out. And this is where Ed Condon at the Pillar, I think, nailed it in talking about the very unique way that Fiducia Supplicans is saying something about papal power. I just did a quick count, and so my number might be off, but it looks like 21 or 22 of the 31 footnotes of Fiducia Supplicans are citing Pope Francis.
Wow.
The document is at pains to talk about the pastoral vision of Pope Francis and to cite Pope Francis teaches us. Pope Francis teaches us.
Yeah, I did take note of the fact that they mention his name a lot.
In other words, there are more citations of Pope Francis and the things that he has written or taught than there are of any other ecclesial document or of any scripture. There's more citations of Pope Francis in his personal teaching than there is of anybody else. And this is a thing that's really weird because the magisterium and the idea of like papal magisterium, the purpose of the office of Peter, the reason that the Petrine office exists is to guard the deposit of faith and to faithfully hand on that deposit of faith. This is why the magisterium exists. And so the Pope, whoever he may be, stands in that same line. And so the Pope disappears into the office. Like the personality of the Pope is meant to disappear into the office.
Right.
Not so much the personality becomes the office.
I mean, that's very Catholic, right?
It's very Catholic.
The priest wears a vestment, so he would disappear into the office.
That's exactly it.
In a sense.
That's exactly right. Now, but if we look at past papal documents from Benedict XVI, John Paul II, Paul VI, John the 23rd, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what you're going to find is that if they're talking about something that a previous pope has said, they'll say, as my predecessor, or depending on the age of the document, as our predecessor said, and they'll cite the thing that was said. Very rarely will they cite themselves, and if they do, it's only to reiterate a certain point, whereas there's a sort of constant reference to the magisterium of Pope Francis as distinct from the magisterium as a whole, or the papal magisterium as sort of like a unique subset within the idea of the magisterium. And this is something that it's not just like in this document where Cardinal Fernandez is describing it as the magisterium of Francis, or although I don't think he uses those words exactly, but it's the same idea. This is something that, from the perspective of ecclesiology and authority, is actually kind of concerning. And so I'm actually confused on this note. What does this mean that we're citing the authority of Francis and his papal authority distinct from everything else? And why is it that Francis is asserting something that the church has never done? Right? Like, if in this case, I will go along with the secular headline. Francis permits. Francis allows this to happen, even though it's the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, if we're being very precise. Right? So I want to acknowledge the precision that's necessary, but at the same time, because it's constantly referring to things that Francis has written or said, why is it that his teaching is being used as the reason? And they're talking about it as an authentic development of doctrine, while at the same time saying this changes nothing about doctrine. So this is in this case, like it's very weird. And if anything, I would say,
so if I were, please, you finish now.
If anything, I would say here, what we're seeing is just sort of the exaggeration of, we have to do everything that Francis says, and we have to accept it completely. And if you don't accept it completely, you are disloyal, and that is totalitarian. That is a dictatorship. That is not the church. That is not the Petrine office. That is something very, very different. And that's dangerous, I think.
I mean, so if I were to push back on what you're saying here.
Fight me. Go for it.
I mean, not necessarily because I disagree with you, because I don't really. I would say look at something like Theology of the Body, right? JP2. I mean, surely he was self-referential in creating this massive, right, and received like as a magnificent body of work. And so being self-referential isn't necessarily a bad thing, I guess. Although, in addition to being self-referential, to my understanding, theology of the body is also like tremendously influenced by Saint John of the Cross. But you know what I mean? So it's not exclusively self-referential.
Yeah, and John Paul is very careful when you read Theology of the Body that he's not talking about this as I teach this, as opposed to what everybody else has ever taught.
Okay.
What he's saying
that's why I asked.
No,
I wanted to know the difference.
Yeah, Theology of the Body, he's articulating what the church has held as the truth. He's articulating now maybe in a new way, in a way that hasn't been expressed quite like this before. So he's communicating a truth that the church has held in a way so that the modern world can understand. So Theology of the Body is really profound because he doesn't change anything about what the church has taught about the human person, about sexual morality, about the purpose and the nature of marriage, of sex, etc. But he is teaching it in a way that hasn't been systematically explained by the church in that way before. So he's actually bringing together all of these different pieces of what the church has taught and articulating it. What this idea of, well, now we can bless couples in irregular situations, that's a change of what the church has done on a disciplinary level, but also in a way on a doctrinal level. And so that's where, if there is confusion that's brought about by this, we've got a problem. The other thing is the idea that this is the magisterium of Francis, distinct from like the office of Peter, is also kind of concerning. This is actually why Pope Benedict XVI, when he wrote the Jesus of Nazareth books, did not publish them as Benedict XVI, but very deliberately published them as the theological reflections of Joseph Ratzinger.
Right.
This is the fruit of his entire life of doing theology, and so he wanted to publish these theological reflections. It just so happened that he also had to be Pope at the same time, but he didn't want this to be considered as part of papal magisterium. Like the Pope said it, therefore this is true. No, he said these are the reflections of a theologian, and I want them to be understood as such. So he made the very deliberate distinction, right? So if Pope Francis was saying,
that's an illuminating example.
Yeah, if Pope Francis was saying, look, as Jorge Bergoglio, I want to contribute this idea. Okay, fine.
Right, free to do so.
But what he's doing is there's sort of the raw exercise of power, and this is a thing that's become sort of the trend over the course of the Francis pontificate, is that by the raw exercise of power, I'm going to do what I want to do, as opposed to I'm going to teach and allow that teaching to be received. Francis has a tendency to legislate. Now, that's another thing that's...
I think that's really apparent in this document, actually.
Well, but this is...
the concept of legislation.
But that's the thing. This document legislates nothing. Because this is not a legal document.
Well, what I mean, though... Okay, you're right. Legislate's the wrong word. I guess what I meant was... So, for example, paragraph 37. At one point it says... Decisions that may be part of pastoral prudence in certain circumstances should not necessarily become a norm. That is to say, it is not appropriate for a diocese, a bishop's conference, or any ecclesial structure to constantly and officially establish procedures and rituals for all kinds of matters. And I kind of understood that as like, so are you saying they're not allowed to get involved?
Well, and this is definitely, I think, an issue in the present life of the church, which is that subsidiarity, the idea that things that can be handled on a local level ought to be handled on a local level. Yeah, a lot of times that's not happening, and that's a difficulty. There's a sense sometimes that we have to just kind of wait for Rome to say something, and then we have to obey it, and that is an exaggeration of papal authority and power, and that's not good for the life of the church. Like real simple, it's not good for the life. So it's a way of governance that I have a problem with, if I'm being real honest. It's a way of governance that isn't really good for the church. And
it's worth noting that you're totally in your right to have an issue there.
Yeah, but it's a way of governance that doesn't take into account the fact that somebody who's closer to the people might actually know something about it. Right? Like it's very possible that I might know some of the things that are happening in the life of my parish in a way that the bishop doesn't know.
Sure.
And so the bishop might have an idea about that, but he can call me and ask me, is this correct? But if he starts making decisions about my parish, and he doesn't do this, by the way, I want to make this really clear. Bishop Frank does not do this at all. But like, if he wanted to just come in and make a decision about my parish, and I shouldn't even like say my parish, like I own it or something, like the parish where I am pastor. If he wanted to come in and tell me that I had to do things a certain way to take care of this particular issue or something like that, I would be, first of all, I would want to be obedient, but I would also want to be able to say to him, you know, that's not exactly what the situation is. And I know the situation because I see it every day, because I live here, because I work here. I work with this group of people every day.
Right.
And this is something that's kind of more and more the trend of like these sort of blanket statements about things that don't seem to really have much reality. So as an example, I think I mentioned this to you the other day. I've been a priest 15 years, Matt. And in those 15 years, I've never been approached by a couple in an irregular situation, homosexual or heterosexual, that is looking for me to bless their relationship and approve of it.
Right.
That's never happened to me. I've been a priest 15 years in the Northeast. So not exactly like a place that's known for like rigid religious fundamentalism, right?
Right.
And this has never occurred that somebody has come asking for this, right? And so I have a sincere question, which is to say simply, how much of a pastoral issue is this really? Which also then begs the question, is this given as a, like, hey, if in a situation where something like this were to happen, here's how to apply it? Or is this is this a declaration that's being made more as a way of like instruction? Like you have to start doing this or start offering this as like as a service of your parish. And I'm very curious about that.
And you know, your point of how much of a pastoral issue is this, right? You're a priest for 15 years, you've never once encountered it. Right? How much of an issue is this? Not only is it non-existent for you, right? The opposite side of the issue is a massive problem for an entire country in the church, like the entire German church.
Right. Yeah. And
you know what I mean?
So, I mean, and that's where I might be looking too locally and not nearly enough in the universal sense. So you're right.
But my point is that, you know, you're saying it's never been an issue for you. This is addressing something that has never happened to you, right? And like literally,
watch now it starts happening every Sunday or something. I got to deal with this.
But you have an entire, I mean, broad strokes, right? But it seems like a pretty accurate broad stroke. An entire country that is essentially on the verge of schism, right? Because they are promoting and have been promoting blessing the union.
Yeah.
And the thing that is then even more confusing to me, I'm just being honest with you, right, is the fact that we know Pope Francis has written a letter to them saying like you shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, and this is where
I shouldn't. I mean, can't.
Can't. Don't. Stop. Impossible. Yeah.
You know.
This is where we start to find.
That's why I'm like, what do I do here?
Yeah.
What do I do here?
We are facing right now some real significant inconsistency in the way that things are, in the way that the church is governed. So if I'm getting cynical, all right, do you mind if I take a slightly cynical path for a second here?
You can, but just so you know, since you brought up cynicism, I'm going to bring up, how do we end this with hope? So
I'm totally with you, because I also want to end with hope.
Okay.
But if we're being a little bit cynical,
but if we're not,
like let's just be a little bit cynical here. So a couple of things come to mind. Number one, on Saturday, this last Saturday. So by the time this comes out, I'm not sure exactly what is, but in any case, this last week, the Vatican financial trial ended, exposing significant corruption within the Vatican and within the financial mechanisms of the Vatican, including the conviction of Cardinal Angelo Becciu, who was then sentenced to a jail term. Now he wants to appeal.
6 years?
5.5, something like that. He wants to appeal his conviction, which is his right. In justice, he's allowed to appeal his conviction. But a significant amount of corruption was uncovered and put on trial. And now, just days after this major thing where the first cardinal to be convicted by a Vatican court since the Vatican became its own independent city-state. So in other words, the first time that a cardinal has been convicted by a Vatican court since the Vatican City began to exist as its own independent state. That's a huge deal.
When did that happen?
You would ask me a question like that where I have to have facts ready to hand. Come on, that's unfair. This is all about polemics, not about facts.
February 11th, 1929.
Okay. So in the first time in nearly 100 years,
Yeah.
a cardinal has been convicted by a Vatican court. That major historic event is on the front page for 2 days. And then suddenly this declaration allowing these blessings, or supposedly allowing these blessings, when in fact it's more discussing what the blessings actually are and the nature of them, and so providing some guidance for how they should be given. Anyway, suddenly that's the news story. Guess what we're not paying any attention to? Corruption in the Vatican.
Yeah.
This major event that happened. I'm sorry, a little bit of the cynical me is saying, that sounds like a PR move to get this off the headlines.
Yeah.
But then the other cynical
fishy.
me, it does smell very fishy. The other cynical me is going, all right, this is supposed to be a pastoral document to help us with pastoral care of the people, right? This is meant to be pastoral, to help us to better shepherd our people, to meet people where they are, right? I don't mind if the church wants to do that. But here's the deal. Why in the world would any right-thinking, sane human being think that this is a good idea to drop this document the week before Christmas? We've got a lot of stuff going on. We're preparing for Christmas. Do you know the stuff that we have to do now? And now all of a sudden, we're going to get inundated. And this is a thing that pastors are actually dealing with. Questions from people about this that, guess what? We're trying to get ourselves and our parishes and our staffs and our parishioners ready for Christmas. Yeah. And this is the thing that you drop. Guess what? This could have waited. This could have waited without doing any harm to people.
Yeah.
And so what this tells me is that there is a lack of care for pastors, for priests. And this is a trend also that is backed up by many different things that have been said by the Pope, by many different actions that have been taken. It's very discouraging. Somebody said to me today, it must be really hard right now to be a priest. And it was a very sincere comment, and I was actually deeply grateful that this person said it. Because, man, it is. Not because priesthood is hard.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Go ahead.
Is it harder to be a priest now? Or I know that you entered the seminary when the sex scandal started. At which point is it harder?
Now.
I mean that's illustrative of
when I was entering seminary, it was the shock and the genuine scandal of the failure of leaders of the church to do the right thing. It was the shock that people who should have been trusted to be holy had sinned so gravely. It was a shock. I'm not saying that it was easy at all.
What year was it?
So that would have been 2001, 2002. Like the Spotlight scandal really. So
clearly too young.
Yeah, like 10 days after I started seminary was 9/11. So like the whole world as I knew it changed, right? And then the Spotlight series started in the Boston Globe in 2002. And so within a year, you have an earth-shattering event that affects all of society, right?
Yeah.
And then you also have this massive change happening within the church of a real scandal and a real pain. There are people who have been hurt. There are real human beings who have been hurt. That was hard to deal with.
Definitely.
But there was also a difference, which was there was a sense that there were good leaders who were trying to do what was right. And John Paul II and his love for priests was trying to then shore up sagging priestly morale, right? Benedict XVI wanted to continue to clean that up and to encourage priests. In the Francis Pontificate, we priests have been described consistently as rigid, as little monsters, as
Wow, wait, little
backwardists.
monsters?
Yeah, this goes back, now many years into the pontificate, but like there's been kind of a constant stream of criticism towards priests. In particular, as an American, it's quite clear that there's a consistent criticism of American priests. It's hard. And so that has become harder because the decisions don't seem to make sense. Like on the one hand, it would be like, how in the world can we do this? Back in 2002, 2003, like how did you allow these things to happen? And there was a movement to change it. There was a movement of reform. Let's change how we handle these kinds of situations. Now what we have is these decisions that so often seem arbitrary and don't seem to be rooted in reality, right? So the restriction of the Latin Mass is an example of this. So the Latin Mass gets restricted with the accusation that it's become a source of dissent from or rejection of Vatican II. I've never experienced that.
It seems, honestly, to me that Traditionis Custodes only made that more of a thing.
Oh yeah, it absolutely,
like it fueled the fire that was there.
It created a problem where there really wasn't a problem. There might have been a few people, as Chris Altieri would say, that some people were mean on the internet. Those people have continued to be mean on the internet. That hasn't changed anything.
No, I mean, honestly, my position would be that, like, I think that there were people who may have been sedevacantists prior to Traditionis Custodes, but it was almost like that happened, and then those people got to go, see, look.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it created a problem where there wasn't one. And this is where I feel like we've just had
No, I want you to use my words.
Created a problem where there wasn't one. I'm sticking to it. No.
Right.
See?
Yeah.
No, but this is the discouraging thing is that there seems to be such inconsistency in the application of justice, in the way that decisions are made. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. So we can't even like feel steady. And that's where it gets really difficult. Now, we want to talk about hope because I think hope is really important to wrap
Well,
this
before
with.
we get there, I want to say one more thing.
Oh, you don't want to get to hope yet? You don't want to be too hopeful?
No, not yet. No, I want to get yeah. No, I wanted to say that I am personally very grateful for your priestly ministry.
Hey, thanks, man.
And your commitment to orthodoxy.
Is that because of the beard?
Because it's
not that kind of orthodoxy. Sorry.
Not that, yeah. I meant the proximity to truth. But
I'm truth adjacent.
Oh, okay. I don't know. It's worth saying those things. And I say that to you and really I guess I say it for any priest, that has that same commitment. And I think that's something that we lay people have to do more. If there's two things that we need to do as lay members of the church, it is one, pray for our priests, and two, thank them, when they do something good in the face of something that is difficult.
Yeah.
It's easy for me. You know what I mean? I not to give names or even be too specific with an example. It's just that you have more at stake than I do. You know what I mean? No, seriously. I guess a good example.
What are they going to do? Fire me? Well, yeah.
No,
maybe.
well, maybe. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, maybe, they can't kick me out of my home.
Yeah, that's true.
So anyway, I do appreciate.
Thank you. I appreciate
your ministry and what you do.
Thank you.
Anyway, teach me to be hopeful.
All right. So some things that I see as reasons for hope.
That was the chamomile tea talking.
No, it softened you up, right? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Reasons for hope. Let me take a sip of the scotch here.
Yeah.
No, seriously. Reasons for hope. One thing. Well, there's several things, but I'm going to start with this one.
Yeah.
While I said that in my years as a priest, I've never been approached by a same-sex couple or even a heterosexual couple in in an irregular relationship, asking me to bless the relationship qua relationship. I have many, many times worked alongside, accompanied people struggling with same-sex attraction, and in their search for God, and in their desire to live a life according to the gospel. And what I have found is that there are so many people out there. There is no one label that we can use that adequately describes the spiritual journey that people are on. And so I think if we can just be real careful with that, it's good. But then also to remember how many people are very sincerely seeking the Lord and very sincerely trying to walk with God. It is extremely moving to me to see that. It's also very powerful for me to hear from some of these folks the experience that they have of this kind of pastoral approach that we're seeing, like in the church in Germany and everything like that. One man who I know who has struggled with this and has really been striving and still carries a very real cross.
Yes.
He said if there's anything that he could say to the German church, the German bishops, is you have no idea what pain you're inflicting on people.
Yeah.
And he says that as a man who has lived the lifestyle and who has struggled and who has suffered as a result. And he said, I don't want anybody to deal with that. I suffer from it still. And he says, and I don't want that. And it's very powerful to hear him speak that way, right? Mm-hmm. There are others who are saying, we're striving to live what the church teaches, and we have found joy in it.
Yes.
Right? And like, I think about the Courage Apostolate a lot because the associate director of Courage lives here in my house. So I know him pretty well. We're gonna get him on as a guest one of these days to talk about this care that is offered by Courage. We'll link to Courage also in the show notes because I think their apostolic work is so incredibly important. But what their members, the people who are part of the Courage movement, part of Courage as an apostolic movement, what they receive, the care, the accompaniment, the friendship, the healing that they receive is so powerful. To simply say, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it, that kind of behavior doesn't do anything, it's not important, it doesn't matter, is actually to deny the suffering that these people have actually experienced in their lives and their own desire for healing. And we don't do them any favors if we do that. So there's great hope because I see these people who have in various ways struggled and come to understand the gift of God's grace and come to desire it more and more, such that they're willing to leave behind sin in pursuit of virtue. And according to the standard of the world, that's not possible. You couldn't possibly leave behind sin and pursue virtue. But here I see people who are doing it. That gives me hope for myself. I don't struggle with the same sins, with the same challenges or anything like that. You know, maybe I can rise above my own temptations and the things that afflict me. Maybe my own tendency towards sin can be conquered. If they can do this, if these folks who are carrying, frankly, a much bigger cross than I carry can do it, then maybe I can too. So it's a sign of hope for me, right?
And of course, you know, the hope also lies in the fact that their journey, right, and their carrying of the cross, one of the ways they receive the grace to do that is via the sacraments, right? It is because the church is the organ of salvation.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's sometimes when these issues come up, it's tempting to despair in the church, right? As the church. But here we see that the church really is a mother, right, to these people.
Yeah. There's sort of a presumption sometimes that like the church just rejects by saying something is wrong or something is sinful. There's sort of a presumption that means the church rejects anyone. I'm like, man, walk in the door of my church, just come in. I can't reject you because I don't know anything about you.
Yeah.
Right? There might be some things that it means, yeah, you know what, you shouldn't receive communion today. That happens.
Yeah.
But that's not because the church says that there's a class of persons that is inadmissible to the life of the church.
And I think it's worth noting too that, like, listen, if I'm shooting straight, there have been times where I have not received communion. You know, I've gone to mass and said, I'm not in the proper state to do that today.
And hey man, I still go to confession. Right? Like I need God's mercy too.
Yeah.
If we keep this in mind, like when the church teaches, the church is indefectible. The church is holy. The church herself is holy. But her members, you and me, not so much. Right? And so while the church is able to teach authoritatively and as a perfect society, that perfect society is full of imperfect persons. And I'm foremost among them. Right? But a very real reason for my hope is that I see people who are imperfect. I just came, before we started this recording, from hearing 2 hours of confessions. We had 1 hour scheduled. I got into the confessional 15 minutes before that started and didn't get out until 45 minutes after the confession time was supposed to end.
Now that's a reason to hope.
That's a reason to hope, because what it tells me is that people recognize that there is such a thing as sin and there is such a thing as God's mercy. And the fact that sin exists and God's mercy exists are not mutually exclusive, right? And sometimes that feels like the pastoral approach that's being promoted, that we can't call anything sin because to do so is to deny people mercy. On the contrary, when we name things as sin, people come seeking mercy for that sin. And I have 2 hours of confessions that can testify to that, except I can't talk about it because of the seal of confession. But here's
that's good. I don't want to know anyway.
No, you don't. But here's the very truthful reality. Like, God in his goodness wants to pour out mercy. And people are responding to that desire that God has for his people. God desires to give mercy to his people. We know this to be true. And people are seeking that mercy out. So it's true that there are people who are seeking mercy. The people who are seeking mercy and are also willing to change their lives are my reason for hope. Because I can't come seeking mercy if I'm not willing to change, if I'm not willing to try. And I might know that it's an uphill battle. I might know that I have tremendous things to struggle against. I can never remember this blessed's name. I don't think he's been canonized yet. I'm pretty sure he's beatified. He was a Chinese man who was an opium addict.
Oh man, I know.
You know the story, right? We'll
Yes.
link to it in the show notes because we can look it up later. But for years he didn't receive the Eucharist because he couldn't stop using the drug, and it pained him that he couldn't. But he was always seeking God's mercy. He was always trying, and he was just like lost in this place. Like all of us sometimes feel that way. Maybe it's not because of addiction, but all of us at different times feel that like the battle is too hard to fight. It's too high a mountain to climb. I can't get past this struggle, this thing. But my sign for hope, my reason for hope is that there are people who know and recognize that God is merciful anyway. Even in that place where we're struggling. And maybe I haven't gotten to the perfect renunciation of sin, but God still wants to be merciful to me. I just got to keep trying. I got to keep at it. And man, as somebody sitting on the other side of the confessional, it's moving to me to know how many people desire that mercy. It's so powerful. So that's a reason for hope. Another reason for hope, and this maybe we can close with because I think it's the most important reason for hope. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. We have the promise of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, the incarnate Son of God, the divine second person of the Blessed Trinity, right? That the truth will always out. The truth will always win. The truth will always triumph over sin and over death. And God promises to remain with his church. Behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. That's how Matthew's gospel ends. Behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Like, God is not going to abandon his church. God is not going to leave us alone. in spite of how I, as a priest, or other clerics like me, might succeed or fail, despite how bishops or popes might struggle or fail, God will not leave his church. We have had bad popes in the history of the church. We have experienced bad bishops in the history of the church. Most of us haven't experienced that in our lifetime, but we've experienced it in the history of the church. And if we understand the history of the church to be in terms of centuries, not in terms of decades, we measure our lives in terms of decades, but the church measures her life in terms of centuries. The fact of the matter is that good popes have come and gone, bad popes have come and gone. Good times for the church have come and gone, and bad times for the church have come and gone. Empires have risen and fallen, and the church is still here. The gospel is still being proclaimed. The sacraments are still being celebrated. Jesus is still present in the Eucharist, and we can receive his mercy in the sacrament of confession. At the end of the day, you can issue any.
What are we worried about?
Yeah, honestly, like you can issue any document you want. It might be discouraging. You can pass any rule that you want, and it might make me angry. It might disturb me. You can make all the kinds of administrative or legal or governance decisions that you want, and I might be disturbed by them, annoyed by them, critical of them, whatever else might come up. I might experience resentment in my heart. I might give vent to that resentment sometimes in front of a microphone or in front of humans. Whatever it is. You know what? All my sins, all my foibles, they're nothing compared to a single drop of the blood of Christ. And that remains true no matter who sits on the throne of Peter, no matter who sits in the chair of the pastor of St. Pius X in Fairfield, Connecticut. That remains true whether I am thriving in my own vocation, living holiness of life, or whether I'm struggling. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is the Savior of the world. It's by his blood that we have been saved. If there's not a reason for hope there, I don't know what is.
I think there is a reason for hope there.
Yeah, good, because I do too. I happen to agree with you on that.
Yeah, I affirm your reason for hope.
So I think what kind of advice, Matt, do you think we should give to people as they read Fiducia Supplicans, or as they think about this, as they see all the news that's out there?
Right, as they read the document.
Or just as they're trying to process this stuff that's being said now about the church all around.
Right, I think again, quite frankly, the reason I wanted to end with hope is because I think that is the advice you give. It's that you don't fall to despair over the one document.
Yeah.
And you rest assured that Jesus is right in the story. You know? And he has allowed this. You know? For whatever reason. I'm not even going to come close to pretending to knowing why.
No, I got a lot of questions. A lot of things I'm going to ask him when I get there.
Yeah.
Like,
Here's to hoping.
Yeah, no, so I've got questions about this, but I also want to know, like, okay, Lord, who was it who looked at the turkey and said, I'm going to eat that bird? Right? Like, who thought of that?
I think if I were to give another piece of advice that's like a timely piece of advice, it would be that remember what the season of Advent is about, right? So we're going to put this episode out somewhat promptly. It's going to come out on Friday, probably.
Sweet.
And so Christmas won't have come yet. If you're listening beyond Christmas, take this for what it is. The entire purpose of Advent is kind of, or at least this year for me, it has really become ridding myself of earthly attachments so I can make room for Jesus, right? When he is born again, and obviously there's some metaphor there, but when I like allowing him into my heart, that is what Christmas is this year. It's, and when I pray on the nativity, it's not that there's this unknown God beyond all things, but rather it is a God who is a name who knows me, right? And so you make room for him, and then you hope in him, right? And something, right, that you said, you brought up, and you didn't use the word assurance, or maybe you did. I didn't think you did, but I'm reading the Gospel of Mark, Michael Pakaluk's translation.
Yeah.
And that is the way that he translates truly, truly. He says, Jesus said, "You have my assurance." And that is a really beautiful and accurate and I think encouraging way to understand all of these promises of Christ. You have my assurance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The gates of hell will not prevail against the church.
Nothing better than that, right?
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, right? And so, and that's why when he says, "Be not afraid," we're capable of it.
Yeah.
Be not afraid. You have my assurance. Well, who's got better assurance than God?
Take it.
The being who sustains literally everything else at every moment, always.
Yeah. Right on.
Oh, okay. So,
yeah,
I think that's it. It's that. And also, it's that this document, with all that is confusing and with, everything that's in here. You know what? At one point in the document, they quote Saint Therese, and I'm gonna read the quote because it's basically what you said, Father. Right? It is most fitting that, or I'll go from earlier. As Saint Therese of the Child Jesus teaches us, this confidence is the sole path that leads us to the love that grants everything. With confidence, the wellspring of grace overflows into our lives. It is most fitting then that we should place heartfelt trust not in ourselves, but in the infinite mercy of God who loves us unconditionally. The sin of the world is great, but not infinite, whereas the merciful love of the Redeemer is indeed infinite. Saint Therese or Father Sam Kachuba, I'm not sure.
We're very similar, I think. Yeah, similar in so many ways. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Matt.
All right.
It's good to be able to talk about this with you.
Yeah.
And I hope this is helpful for people because I know it is confusing. And I also know there's a lot of stuff out there. So just maybe last encouragement would be read the document itself. Don't read the secular news outlets because they're going to distort it. That is a necessity. Yeah.
You have to read the document.
Go to the source. And we're going to link to some good articles that can help you to understand and process this so that you're not getting pulled into the stuff that's frankly either a distortion or an exaggeration of what the truth is about this.
Right.
The church cares very much about ministering to and caring for people in these difficult situations, in situations that this document describes as irregular or that are sinful. The church still cares. The church still wants to accompany them. And so it's not simply a judgment on persons. It's an acknowledgement of a reality that there are certain things that are bad for human beings to do that separate us from God. And the church calls all of us. Doesn't matter who you are. The church calls all of us to conversion. And that conversion is won by Christ, and he's the one that we put our confidence in and our trust in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't usually pray at the end of episodes, but I think it would be appropriate if we did today.
Okay. Actually, I was thinking about this as what kind of blessing can we give that could be appropriate. So in the document, actually, they remind us of that great blessing that comes in the scriptures. Let me just find the exact quote here. So in the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24 through 26, the blessing, the kind of the primordial blessing in a way, is may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Amen.
Amen. Merry Christmas, Matt.
Hey, it's still Advent.
I know, but I won't see you before Christmas. So.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
All right. Peace, brother.
Peace. Hey, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to further support The Tangent, please consider subscribing or following on your preferred platform, following us at thetangent_Catholic on Instagram, or even donating at veritascatholic.com. See you next time. God bless.